Head of Inclusion and Diversity at Pinterest. Michelle King, Head of Integrated Strategy and Partnerships for Innovation at UN Women. Stephanie Lampkin, founder and CEO of Blendor, and Karen Ulrich Stacy, founder of Diversity Lab. And just, can you all make sure your mics are on, please?
Testing.
Testing.
Okay, so our last panelist just said, tell the truth, no matter how trivial it is. I want you to know why I wore a sweater. I worried that that little pooch in my stomach was gonna show when I sat in this chair. And my other fear was I was gonna do this the whole time. Are we good? I'm Karen Ulrich Stacy. I'm the CEO of a company called Diversity Lab. And the reason it's called Lab is because we're testing new ways to increase and sustain diversity and inclusion, mostly in the legal field. So I was the head of talent for many very large law firms for 25 years. And I watched as we got whiter and older year by year by year. And I called bullshit on that. So Diversity Lab is trying all kinds of new things to increase diversity. We brought in returnships to legal field. We just brought the Rooney Rule into the legal field and expanded it. Instead of one woman or minority, you have to consider 30% women and minority. And so part of my call to action is to stop fucking talking about the lack of diversity and start doing something about it. So I am incredibly honored to be with 3 incredibly action-oriented women who are making an impact, and they have data to prove it, in various fields and across the world. And so I'm gonna ask them some questions today and get their take on this and hear what they're doing and what they've done in order to change the face of our world and our industries. So with that, I'm gonna start. Candace and Stephanie, I want you both to consider answering this one. So
Sure.
The Rooney Rule, just as an example. I've talked about the fact we're bringing it into law. Clearly, some tech companies have already started to think about that in an effort to increase, right, the number of women and minorities. Are you seeing the Rooney Rule as a potential tool that will do that? And what other tools and techniques do you see coming into, no matter the industry, that is helping to reduce unconscious bias, specifically in recruitment as a starting point?
Yeah. Well, I can definitely start by talking about the Rooney Rule. So at Pinterest in 2015, a couple of things happened. One, Pinterest announced diversity hiring goals. So goals in terms of hiring women and in terms of hiring people from underrepresented backgrounds, African American, Latino, Latina, and Native American employees. And this was actually based on a lot of research around the market. A legal analysis was done, and we found that there was massive underrepresentation in those groups. And so the Rooney Rule was implemented, and we said it was similar to the Rooney Rule, at least one woman and at least one underrepresented ethnic candidate interviewed for every executive role. I think that, to your point, Karen, around the 30% that you've implemented, one is not enough. And I know there's research that shows that if there's just one woman or one underrepresented candidate in the pool, there's something called moral licensing that takes place where we're like, oh, we checked that box, boom. And so we actually, a great example of where the Rooney Rule worked really well for us was with our head of engineering, our most senior engineering position in the company. And we actually managed to interview hundreds of women for this role in an area where women are less than 5% of the talent pool. We did that by asking our employees, we did that by just looking further and farther throughout the market. And we actually ended up hiring our head of engineering, a woman, her name is Lee Fan, and she's amazing as a result of that process. Overall, the Rooney Rule has increased our executive level leadership. We went from 0 underrepresented ethnic minority employees at the executive level to 3, and our percentage of women increased to over 20%. So we've actually extended it down into our top managerial roles as well.
I love it when you talk data.
I do too.
Thoughts?
Yeah, so my company is building technology focused on mitigating unconscious bias. So applying data analytics and artificial intelligence to this idea that your race, your gender, et cetera, should not be in consideration for your qualifications. And so I have the benefit of sort of a bird's eye view in working with companies like Pinterest and many others to see what they're doing that works and doesn't work. So Rooney Rule is a really great strategy. A lot of companies are directly incentivizing hiring managers to bring on women and underrepresented minorities, because my theory is, it starts, so let me take a step back. A lot of companies talk about the pipeline problem contributing to why the fact that their workforce is pretty homogenous. I think that's only part of the story. I think there's systematic things in how we evaluate talent, and the like me and status quo bias that oftentimes go into the fact that people don't make it beyond the first, second, and final rounds of interviews. And we shine the light on the fit of the candidate, but we don't shine the light on the managers and their behavior. And so we're really focused on using data to drive transparency and accountability around what is actually going on when you say this person is not a culture fit. And then you end up hiring a white guy who's 27 without a college degree.
Wow, did that resonate? I'm going to go with yes. So it's interesting, right? Because you heard a couple of different tools. I mean, the one you've created, Blendor, which is amazing, and then the Rooney Rule and some of these other things that we've borrowed, right, from Wade at the NFL. Right. That obviously is going to have some impact, as you've said, on the pipeline. So one of our biggest difficulties is even if we do hire women and minorities, are we advancing them? Are we keeping them? And what do we need to do different and better? And what are you all doing different and better? And when you throw data in, I would love it, to keep our women and minorities and to ensure that they're advancing and growing their careers. Do you want to start us?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that diversity begets diversity, so we need to have people on the board, on the executive teams, as a representative of that you can succeed here. And so one of the things that we did is we published a score called Blend Score, which takes into consideration the representation of leadership, diversity in leadership at a lot of these companies. And we put the faces up there, so you can actually see what these women and people of color are doing and what impact that they're having, because we think that will drive a lot more motivation around women entering and staying in a lot of these companies.
Anything to add?
I would definitely say start with welcoming everyone, which sounds so fundamental, but actually we did some research at Pinterest around women and men in their first 3 months at the company. And we found that women experience a higher degree of belonging uncertainty. So that's searching for signs that you actually belong in that environment. And especially in areas like software engineering, where women are often less than 1 in 5 engineers on their teams. So we're working with a way to actually, within someone's first couple of weeks, share stories when you find out that other people are also uncertain of if they belong. So you normalize it, and it becomes this thing that doesn't grow and make you feel less confident. But certainly, we also are starting to measure more behavioral things, like how people give feedback. Women tend to get more personality feedback. So we actually looked at some of the feedback coming in to assess if women and men are getting different types of feedback. And then that goes into coaching managers about how they give feedback. There are all these steps in between promotion. I mean, promotion data, certainly we look at that. We actually encourage our women engineers to nominate themselves at the same rate as men, because a lot of tech companies have a nomination process. And then at the same time, there are all these steps in the way, like tech lead. So that's, you're leading the technical aspect of an engineering project. And was there any data collected before on tech leads? And a lot of companies don't collect that. Now we do. Now we can track that.
Well, and Michelle, you must have been just jonesing when you were hearing that, because I don't know if you know, but she's written an article on the very topic of entry interviews and the idea that sometimes we give more credence to people who exit and what they think than we give to those people who have survived in our organizations. And I think these entry interviews are really an interesting thing. And I don't know, I put you on the spot because it's not one of our questions.
Totally fine, put me on the spot. I actually need to give credit to the idea of entry interviews. So I was speaking with Ariana Huffington, it's her idea. And she actually does this at Thrive Global. And I think you can read the story on this and the detail behind them. It's on my LinkedIn. But Ariana was really talking about the importance of sitting down with a new hire, and I absolutely love this idea because it's so simple, and asking them what are their interests outside of work. Now, obviously, you've got to do this in a way that makes that person comfortable to share, but it's really the idea of engaging an employee upfront. So changing social norms within organizations from day one and saying to women and men and anybody what's important to you outside of work and how do we make work fit into your life rather than the other way around. And she has this amazing example of where she did this with a woman and who had just joined her team, and the woman said, look, it's really important to me that I drop my daughter off at 7:30 in the morning. And Ariana said, great, now we're going to change all the team meetings to make sure they start at 8:30. And a simple change like that can include everybody. It doesn't just have to be about women. Everybody has different needs. And the challenge is you need mature managers to actually manage that process, but it can be incredibly powerful on day one to have your manager say what's important to you and what matters and how can we make that work. So I love it. I think it's a great thing.
I agree. So it's interesting, right? Because that's a simple change. It doesn't involve innovation. It doesn't involve technology. It's something that you can do right now, right here, and it has such a effect on inclusion. So, but some of these other things we're talking about are bigger, right? Technologies, right? For a company to adopt a technology, for us to try something innovative sometimes feels like we're moving a mountain. So this is a question for you, since you are head of strategy and partnerships of innovation for UN Women. How do we make sure that we're considering all of those hard things when it's a technology or an innovation, and being sure that, one, we can implement them, and two, that we're not leaving anybody behind?
Yeah. So, I thought long and hard about this. I think the important thing is to start with why, right? So there's the traditional business case around advancing women and girls in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. It's the commercial argument, really, that this affects bottom line. And if you look at sort of closing the gap in mobile phones in terms of the gender gap, that could add 170 billion to the market by 2020, just as one example, right? You look at the labor supply issue from a commercial perspective, 10 of the hardest jobs to fill right now are in STEM. So adding more women makes sense, right? GE is doing a lot of amazing work around that. So the commercial argument's solid. I think from my perspective, the argument gets a bit more real when you look at how technology and innovation can transform the lives of women and girls. So if you look at mobile technology and how financial mobile technologies have transformed millions of women and girls' lives in developing countries, where now they have access to technology and they don't have to go through an intermediary to get access to those financial services, right? But more important, I think there's this piece of missed market opportunities. So if you look at, I've got a great example around engineering, right? Where you look at how we design safety features on cars, and the lack of a gender-responsive approach to that, which has resulted in a number of incidents where they didn't account for the differences in height. Now that affects men and women, but it's predominantly a gender issue. And that has real-life consequences, right? So what we actually see is that there's this missed market opportunity. So to make innovation and technology work for everybody, but particularly for women and girls, which is my area, I think there's three things organizations need to do. And they sound really simple, but they're obviously not. The first is including women in the actual innovation cycle. So making sure you have women on your innovation and technology teams, right? That's the first piece. You need that gender perspective as part of the innovation cycle. The second thing is throughout the innovation cycle, consider what are the needs of women and girls, right? And then actually design innovative solutions to meet those needs. And it's really as simple as that sounds. That is the process through which you engender in any innovation cycle, and you make sure that the solutions we develop actually benefit us now and meet our needs now, but also in the future as a lot of the changes are happening. So that's really how I would recommend doing it.
Can I comment? I think one of the biggest challenges we face is there are way more success stories of men creating innovations that appeal to women than there are the horror stories of men neglecting women and creating products that don't include us. And so even though they're aware of the commercial benefits, they've had enough evidence of success that, oh, we can create create something that's globally appealing and not have any women's voices involved. And so what I'm sort of challenged with doing is making it more personal and saying, how can we, on a micro level, as opposed to a macro level, demonstrate how much your business improves by taking an engineering team that was once completely homogenous and adding 2 women? Does it make your code quality better? Does it increase market share? Because I think as much as we know about the McKinsey studies, and there's so much evident, it really won't hit home until guys identify that, like, okay, I see clearly why adding a woman on this team is a huge asset and will help me reach our KPIs.
Yeah, and I completely agree with both of you. From the perspective of not only the engineers building the teams and the product managers, but so many people that make a product come to life. So I think about Pinterest, and it is completely a product dedicated to an individual. What your friends like, what your friends are pinning, don't really matter. We all have really different tastes, but if you can find makeup for your skin tone, if you can find hairstyles for your hair texture, then you're going to use Pinterest more, and it's going to be useful globally. And that is whether you're, someone in the United States, or whether you're a Muslim woman in the UK, or, it's globally important. And so I'm pulling more of those stories of where we failed to meet some of those markets, and that has motivated the team as well.
So that begs the question, who is doing this well, right? Because we're happy to point out all the people who are doing it badly. Uber, just saying. But what we don't point out a lot of times is the unicorns that are doing it right. And maybe they're not doing it right in every single area. Stephanie and I have had this conversation. But who's doing some things better than others, and who should we be looking to in the various industries and the various sectors as possible shining lights now or in the future?
Mm-hmm. So who's heard of Catalyst, the organization? Okay, great, awesome, this is great. So I worked at Catalyst for 10 years, and I worked in consulting, so I was working with lots of different organizations. So it was really interesting because I was often working with organizations that were really starting off, but I also every now and again got to work with a company that was like off and running and building something new and cool. So, a couple companies that come to mind are Deloitte. I think, in general, a lot of the big 4 firms since the mid-90s have been, almost competing for talent. And so they've been really faced with how do we innovate really quickly in creating a workplace for everyone. And everything from, mass career customization to different ways that people work. Intel is another organization that I've seen set goals early and in different ways. Those are some organizations. Accenture is another. They've just put out their goal that by 2025, they want to be 50% women. And I was in a conversation with their CEO in North America, Julie Sweet, and she just absolutely understands how metrics interplay with the stories. So those are a few.
I have a slightly different view on this because I think...
We like that, debate it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think there's a tendency, particularly in diversity and inclusion, like practitioners, to want best practices, and you're absolutely correct, they are out there. I think, though, in having a look at industry best practices, the thing that actually makes them best practices is that you can't cut, copy, and paste, right? Mm-hmm. So in my mind, if I had to say what are the 2 things that make best practices, and LinkedIn's another great example of this, is firstly, they're business owned. So solutions are driven by the business, and they're organically created for that business, and they meet the business where they are on the inclusion continuum. So some businesses I work with haven't even heard of the term diversity and inclusion, right? And others are looking at how they can move their representation of women in senior management from 30 to 40%. So having it owned by the business is kind of the first bit, and that makes it unique to that business. I think the second bit, why you can't cut, copy, and paste, and why I refrain from just doing that with best practices, is this piece really around any solution you implement has to be aligned to the organization's architecture. So you have to align it to the leadership, the structure, the people, the systems, the process, or it won't work. And so I really refrain from trying to pick out best practices. I think the value and the tremendous value that D&I practitioners add is looking for those pockets of excellence and then trying to determine how you scale that within a business and how you take that and modify it to suit a particular business. And that's truly, I mean, the LinkedIn is a really great example of how they've done that in their sales organization.
Yeah. And I would just quickly add to that. I mean, I think there are some underlying things that companies need to do and they need to be ready for that cut across businesses and business units. So I think having goals and targets and being very clear about where you're going, for example, is really key. I don't think you should set the same goals if you're very early on or if you're, mining versus, accounting. But I do think that accountability and business leadership and support are first and foremost, regardless of where you are.
And I want to come back to the accountability, but I want to give you a chance, Stephanie, to say what you think and what you see, because you're obviously the people who are coming to you for help are enlightened.
Yeah, and I hate the sort of cop-out response that I agree with both of you, but I do because I don't think there is a best size fits all. And the best examples have been where the CEO makes it a huge priority. My CTO coined this term, diversity theater, where companies will hire a chief diversity officer, no offense. But this person has no power, no budget, no influence. And Candace should be like the second highest paid person at Pinterest, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm biased. But when you have a CEO like Mark Benioff at Salesforce, Brian at Intel, the highest ranked company based on the data that we've seen is Intuit. When you have the leadership that takes the effort, as you said, to sort of mold and craft solutions that fit to the unique nuances of each side of the business, as opposed to HR sort of trying to make the case and just doing a lot of preaching to the choir, you don't really see results. It's just a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. Okay, so let's come back to the accountability piece and the metrics piece, right? Because you see the tech companies saying, this is our data. And I think it was an engineer at your company who kind of forced the companies to be more transparent around their metrics. But it's interesting because the Fortune researchers, right before this, the past Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit in London, they researched all the Fortune 500 companies and they looked at who was being transparent with their data. And I think in the media, we see a lot about tech companies being transparent. But it turns out that of the Fortune 500, only 3% actually publish their diversity numbers, which is really small in comparison to what we're seeing in tech. So what role is and should data and transparency play in what we're talking about in terms of moving the needle? And I want to make sure you talk a little bit about the new product, Blend Score, because that falls right into this, but also your company is actually publishing, as is a lot of other tech companies. So let's talk a little bit about that accountability, because you are in the public with your information.
Oh, yes, we're in the public with our numbers and our goals. So, I think one thing I would, step back and say is, and I think this has been echoed throughout this panel, the goals set by Pinterest, they were set 6 months before I started. So the call was made by our co-founders, our CEO and our co-founder, and our executive team. And I think that's a very important sequence because I agree, Stephanie's particularly with what you said around it coming from HR. My role is to make sure that we're accountable and we're moving and we're measuring and we're looking at where things are going and we're flagging things. But it's Ben, our CEO, who is the one who is answering the hard questions, talking about this, thinking about, how he can role model things better. And so Pinterest, Tracy Chow, who is an engineer at Pinterest for over 4 years, she was the 8th employee, and she's now looking into her own business ventures. She went to the Grace Hopper conference, realized that everyone was talking about how, there were very few women in engineering. And we're like, wait, where are the engineering numbers? A lot of companies release data, but they don't actually release specific engineering numbers. Okay. So in 2014, we started releasing our data. And so we have our tech numbers, which include our product teams, designers, product managers, but we also always release our engineering specific numbers. And our leadership numbers are very specific to executives or executives -1. We don't include senior managers. So the numbers are so specific, and it helps us catch things that we miss. So we can't pat ourselves on the back. Like when I look at, how the Rooney Rule has really helped our executive team, we've now moved that rule down one level. We still haven't yet seen those results because we weren't measuring those yet. So I really think that numbers play a very important role. I will caution, though, that the data has to be intertwined with the stories.
Right.
It can become very impersonal when leaders are like, are we on our metric? Are we off of our metric?
Right.
Like those metrics are part of some tools, but they can almost be kind of arbitrary in the sense that even when we're hitting them, we might not be creating inclusion.
Right, because you can also have data tell the story you want it to tell.
Right.
Right, so one of my favorite things in law firms is we'll be talking about the lack of diversity, and a law firm will say, but we have 25% women, that's more than anyone else. Like, when did that become good?
Right, exactly.
So you have to be careful, like you said, about the data and what story it's telling or not telling.
Right.
Thoughts?
I just think accountability drives behavior change. And so if companies know that the information that they're publishing is going to be public and that they're even going to be viewed in terms of how they rank against other companies, they're more likely willing to act on that change. There's a really good chart out there called Knowledge is Beautiful that actually shows how tech diversity stacks up against other industries. And I think the reason why you see what's happening in tech happen because it's so bad, even compared to finance and law and retail and all these other industries that are bad, but tech is really, really bad. So what I found surprising about launching Blend Score was it got the attention of head of communications and board members and shareholders, and those people were more willing to drive change within the company and get me in touch with the right people than I found anything else that I had done. Because it becomes part of your employer brand. And I always give the analogy of the US News World Report for colleges and universities, and that's what we want to be for companies. If this is something that a young college woman looks at and says, where do I want to go work? Let's see where the rankings are. Then a CEO is going to think a lot more seriously about their initiatives to improve.
And one thing, because I'm going to help you self-promote real quick. One of the things about Blend Score that's interesting, right, is US News and Vault even, Christy was at Vault for a long time, we report diversity numbers, right? And that's head count. That's not the whole story, and it shouldn't be the whole story. And one of the things that Blend Score does is it looks at both objective and subjective data. So it's the quantitative and the qualitative data. So it's not just the snapshot of here and now. How diverse are you into it? It's what are you doing right now? What are you doing tomorrow? What are you doing 5 years from now? And what programs, what policies, what actions have you put in place that are going to help now, but in the future? And it combines the two, which is so different, right, than just saying, here's a snapshot of where we are, because we all know if one woman leaves, that data changes drastically. We just went down 2 percentage points on boards, which is so disheartening, right? Because there has been this movement, and with 2020 and direct women and everyone putting resources to that, we know that that snapshot can change in a heartbeat. And so the combination of Blend Score paying attention to all of those different factors is huge, in my personal opinion.
I'm bringing her to all of my investor meetings.
See, she shouldn't, because I'll be like this, you don't invest, you're stupid. We good here? Yeah. All right, so Michelle, I want to turn it to you for just a second, because we get so insular sometimes, right? Tech gets so insular, law gets so insular, financial services get so insular. You see the world in such a broad brush, right? Because you're dealing here in the States, you're dealing worldwide with these issues. I mean, just your engineering example of the seatbelt, I think, was enlightening, because it's so different than what I think about every day, all day. So talk a little bit about your perspective from UN Women and what you all are doing at the industry level and beyond to help push this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very passionate about this. So I'm going to try and keep this relatively short. But for UN Women, we see advancing women and girls in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship as a strategic imperative, right? This is something we have to do. And we have an innovation unit that is dedicated to this. And we're really looking at driving change through 4 kind of key areas. The first is building awareness of innovations that meet the needs of women and girls, right? And that's really how we get industry funding. It's how we build those innovations and support them through co-creation and through scaling them. So that's sort of our first piece. The second is really around promoting women as innovators, because that's particularly important around sort of debunking some of the stereotypes as to what that looks like. The third is working with our partners, so there can be nonprofits, they can be commercial organizations, to actually engender the innovation cycle. So what I was talking about before as to how you take that gender perspective through the innovation cycle, and that is work that we actively do. And the last piece is really around actually running our own projects. So we have 4 key innovation projects, everything from a virtual skills school right through to helping women farmers in Rwanda through mobile phone apps that help them actually run their businesses better. So we actually run our own projects. But one of the key things that I think we're doing, and I can share this, we're launching it in September and we're very excited about it, is we are bringing together a cross-section of commercial organizations, so private sector, nonprofit, and academic, and we are forming a global innovation coalition for change. It's quite a mouthful. I'll refer to it
I'm sure you'll come up with some kind of acronym.
Come on. I'll refer to it as the GICC.
See, I told you.
There you go, acronym. But the GICC is really aimed at taking action. So we're bringing these groups together who have a vested interest in advancing women and girls in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship, and looking at how we can do that at an industry-wide level. So we're trying to do something completely different from what we've done before. We're really excited about it, and we're launching it on September 14th. So that is something that I think, watch the space, because there'll be a lot of action and outcomes that come through that.
That's phenomenal. See, taking action. I love that. So we're going to need to close here, but before we do, I want to ask, and Candace, as part of your answer, please work in the idea that you've now been at the company for about 1.5 years, and like you said, the goals were set before you. And I bet there were some people in the room that said, well, why wouldn't they wait and set the goals with her? But your point was well taken, that it was set from the top, and you're there to provide some accountability and some action and some strategic value. So as you answer this question, please also answer what you've learned in the last 1.5 years and how easy or hard it was and has continued to be as you've gone through that journey. So here's my last question for all of you. So everyone sitting in this room, it's kind of like an echo chamber, right? Because we all care about this. We're all personally taking action, and we're all trying to work really hard to continue to support each other, but we're also working really hard to make sure that our organizations are supporting us and each other, and we're also making sure that we're allied with men and others so that as a community, we can lift each other up. So what is your one piece of advice, keeping in mind you're in an echo chamber, what you would suggest that we all do different than we've done before, and how we can step right outside of this room and take an action that maybe we're not already taking in order to help rise and lift everyone in this room together? Who wants to start that?
Ooh, that's a tall order. And work in the, okay.
Yeah,
no.
and work that in, Candace.
Well, I mean, I guess, so earlier this year at South by Southwest, I gave a talk that was around some of the lessons I'd learned within my first year at Pinterest, and it was an hour. So I'm not going to take that amount of time. But I will say that I think you've heard so much about the business and how important it is. Nobody takes a role like, working in diversity that doesn't incredibly passionately care about this, literally sometimes have dreams about it. I mean, I'm not kidding. And when you choose which company you're going to work for, you are very careful, and you're as careful as you can be to make sure that the business is actually going to be the ones that are really pressing this agenda forward. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind. I also think that all of us can go out and talk to somebody who maybe wouldn't show up to an event like this, and start the conversation. I found that one of the bigger barriers to diversity work is people feel really awkward and nervous. People are very afraid of saying the wrong thing. In fact, the group of people in that category are much bigger than the group of people who are completely apathetic or even feel that there are some disadvantages for them with diversity. And so meet people where they are and just start a conversation, ask them a question, ask them about them, ask them about a time they might have felt excluded. And I think that would go a long way.
Good advice. You want to follow that?
Not really. So it's somewhat related, but different. Is I think if I was to give one bit of advice, particularly in working with the corporations we've been working with, and seeing what really works, I would say build awareness. So, that example of the entry interview, but more importantly for leaders, you really drive change when leaders have that awareness, right, of inequality and that understanding of where inequality happens in organizations. And, you can have all the metrics, you can have all the best practice, you can have all that stuff, but the bottom line, if a leader doesn't get it, you're lost. And so drawing on the LinkedIn example again, there is their SVP of the sales organization who had his aha Oprah moment, where a woman said to him, hey, all you have on your leadership team are white males. And he suddenly had a moment where he understood what that meant. And so a leader's role is to not only build their own awareness, but it's also to build their leadership's awareness. Now I get asked, how do you do that? So this is where it links in beautifully with Sally's work, because it's through courageous conversations. So in one-on-one sessions and in team meetings, starting to have difficult conversations about people's experiences of inequality. If you don't have a lot of women on your leadership team, maybe sharing with the team why that is, and talking through the women who are on the leadership team's experience of what it's like to work there. And having those powerful conversations and making those conversations an ongoing process to kind of sense check where things are at, how they're improving, and what you can do. And just simply through doing that, LinkedIn managed to transform it, but also through entry interviews, you really reestablish that this is just how we work here. We have honest conversations about inequality in the workplace, recognizing it's not a level playing field, and we need to actually take tangible steps to rectify that. So build awareness.
And that's incredible, because I heard Wade say, and it's in addition to what you said, which is build awareness, which then hopefully creates reflection. And Wade said that, and I thought that was so powerful, because, right, building awareness, and then you reflect. And you might do that while you're in the room, if you're an extrovert. You might do that laying in bed at night if you're an introvert. But you reflect on what you learned and how that should change or evolve, or maybe not. Hopefully that's not the case. All right, parting words.
I'll try to keep this short. So I had a conversation over lunch with a young woman about why quotas and affirmative action are now dirty words. Because no one wants to feel like they were brought into an organization not based on their merits, just based on their characteristics. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these systems were put in place because you have unique assets. And even if you feel tokenized, you need to be a representative, and you need to demonstrate that your presence in the room is valuable, and it's going to help those that come after you. But I think going back to the evidence, the importance of tying this to the business value, it's important that you take credit for the fact that you possess naturally qualities, characteristics, assets that will be valuable, and not thinking, oh, you were just giving a handout because of your gender or race, and just own that.
May I have a huge